at the Last Supper when Jesus is having his Last Supper, and after they finish eating, he washes the apostles' feet. You don't get a better view of a servant leader than you do in that passage. Hey, like, this is something that as a leader, as a manager, as somebody who works with residents, who works with owners, who works with people in general, knows that you have to serve people, right? That is what we are here to do. One of the things that's helped me with is really being quiet. And I think that's a tricky one, especially in what we do. There's a lot of noise. There's residents, there's staff, there's owners, there's all this noise all the time, because I want to listen for anything that comes into my mind that could potentially take me to that next step. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in my heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light.
Well, super excited to have you on. Welcome.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me and having the conversation.
Michelle, I want to start a little bit with some professional background. How did you get in multifamily?
Yeah, so I've been in multifamily since 2001. Actually, this is my second career, if you can imagine. My first career was in veterinary science. I was actually recruited into multifamily right out of college. So I went back to school, got a bachelor's degree in business, and was in the career center trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. And there happened to be a recruiter from a multifamily firm up in New England there. And she basically said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I can do anything, but I really want to travel. I really want to go out and do something interesting and travel. And she said, well, I got just the job for you. It's called a property manager. And I had no idea what she was talking about, but I just took a leap of faith and jumped right in. And here I am this many years later, still working in the same industry. So done a lot of different things over the years, but really, really love this industry.
How did you manage your first job, like jumping straight into a property manager role? I'm sure that there's some great stories out there for our audience.
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember going home and telling my parents, oh, I got this great job. And they said, oh, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't really know, some sort of property management thing. I grew up in a very rural area, so it wasn't like apartment communities were not normal, right? So I remember my dad saying, you mean you're going to be like a landlord? Like, he just couldn't wrap his head around, like, what do you mean? You're just going to like collect rent? Like, what are you going to do? And as I got into it, I got really excited because, when you go to business school, they teach you about marketing and they teach you about accounting and legal. And I was doing all of those things. So my business degree equated very well to being a property manager because I was able to take all of those same skills that I had just learned and apply them in the day to day, right? The 4 P's of marketing, all of those things I was actually using. And so it was really, really cool to be able to equate all of my recent college experience to my actual day-to-day job. So it was really neat. It was definitely a learning curve. I will say that I had a ton of fun stories like everybody else does, I feel like, in property management, right? With residents.
I hear some.
I have
Let
a
me.
million of them.
We're not going to
Um,
any other questions until you share some of those stories.
like, really, there's a million of them. I realized very quickly I was not a very good leasing agent. The good news is I was up in New England, which has always traditionally been a very tight market. And so I didn't really have to be a very good salesperson. We always had a wait list. So it wasn't hard to be a leasing agent. But then as I got out into other markets, I realized I'm not very good at this sales thing. Luckily for me, the company that I worked for recognized that I had other skills in other areas and was a much better property manager and more on the administrative and bookkeeping side and organizationally strong. And that, I can supervise the leasing staff really well. I can be a really good leader for them. but my actual closing ratio was only about 30%. Like I barely scraped by the minimum, right? It just it wasn't the right role for me, but I, figured that out in time, and I was am luckily enough that the company I worked for recognized my skills and not just said, well, she's not very good at leasing, which I know is where a lot of people in our industry start. So I was very fortunate in that regard.
What keeps you in an industry after this many years? What makes you still be around?
Well, honestly, Adrian, I don't know that I could do anything else. It's hard, right? You get really good at what you know, and you get really good at the industry and speaking about the industry and giving back. I think that's something, as you spend a lot of years in this industry, you start to think about, how can I give back? What can I give to other people that are in the industry, that are coming up, that are starting, that are learning? And if I were to go to another industry, say, I wouldn't have that knowledge, I wouldn't have that expertise to be able to share. So I think that's one of the things. I also will say, and you probably hear this almost every time you talk to anybody, I know you and I have talked about this too, is the people in this industry are really amazing. Like, we are really just surrounded by really incredible people. And I don't, I know, have friends and family and colleagues and in other industries, and it's just not the same. It's not this tight knit group of people who really take care of each other. So I think that is very unique, and I don't know that you would find that. I also, for a short time, not many people know this, did try to get out of the industry, which I say a lot of times our industry is like the Hotel California. Like, you really can't ever leave. And I went into another industry, and it's like I just turned tails and came right back. Like, it didn't work. I was just like, this isn't comfortable for me. I feel a little like an imposter. I'm not sure what I'm doing. I don't feel like I belong here. I feel like I belong in multifamily, and that's why I stick around.
Tell us that wild story. Pick the wildest story in property management.
Oh, so the wildest story I have, I mean, I have a couple. Probably my favorite is I was running a student housing property up in Michigan, and I was on rotation. So I was working for a company where I was traveling to all different properties all the time. I was on the road for 11 days, home for 3. And I was at a property up in Michigan, did the property takeover. We purchased the property, and it was all undergrad students, right? Off campus housing. At the time, we had pagers. I know you and I are going to age ourselves there a little bit, saying, you used to carry a pager for resident maintenance emergencies. And we had the pager on a flyer on the office, on the answering machine, on the voicemail. CallMax had the pager number. Like, everybody had the pager number, right? And I had come home for my 3 days off to New England. I went home to New England, and my leasing staff was still there, but they were generally off on the weekends. And this happened to be a weekend that the office was closed Saturday and Sunday, if you can imagine. Apparently, one of the students had a sewer backup, and which is a huge emergency. So they called 911, because we would call that an emergency. So who do you call in case of an emergency? You call 911. So she called 911, said, I have a sewer backup. You need to send somebody out to take care of it. And 911 said, well, we don't do that. And so the girl said, well, what do I do? And she said, well, if I were you, or if you were my kid, you should go stay at a hotel, and the landlord will reimburse you for it. So I get back to work Monday morning, fly back in, get to the property, get a voicemail on the answering machine from this young lady's mother saying, my daughter's in a hotel because you have your plumbing. And of course, it's all our fault that there was a backup, which later on we realized it was something she had flushed, which we're all not surprised about that, but we'll leave that for another day. Her mother insisted that we pay for her hotel, which, by the way, she stayed at the nicest hotel in town with her friends and partied up and caused all sorts of damage. So it was this huge bill for movies, accommodations, food, drinks, you name it. Everything was billed to the room. It was a couple $1,000s for the weekend. And so she just had a great old time. And the night, and I was like, so help me if I get my hands on that 911 operator. Like, you cannot make this stuff up. Why would you call 911 for a sewer backup? So that's one of the better ones. Yeah. And, we went round and round with our parents for a while on it. That was very interesting. That was fairly early on in my career. So that was probably, I was only a couple years in and was like, I don't even know what to do with this, which I still hear some stuff out there that are like head scratchers where you're like, I can't even believe this, right? Where does this stuff come from?
When you think about it, I don't think that there's many places you could work at to kind of get this type of wild stories, like, because
Hmm.
we're like part of people's lives. We don't like actually work, we integrate with our lives. So
Right.
it's like you get the good, the bad, and the ugly. Like you get it all.
Right.
You get to be a part of all. Like it's it's a unique experience. I see
Hmm.
myself fortunate to kind of be part of these experiences. Michelle, one of the things that I want to touch on extensively during our conversation, and we've been kind of like talking about this in preparation of recording a podcast, is that I know your faith is very important to you. So I
Yes.
wanted to ask you to share more about your journey back to
Hmm.
faith and how has it impacted your life and career.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for asking. You and I have had, like you said, we've had this conversation a couple of times, right? And it's a tough one when you think about work and religion, right? My journey is I grew up at what they call a cradle Catholic, meaning I was born into the faith. I had was fortunate enough to have very devout Catholic parents, so was raised in the Catholic Church, went to Catholic school until probably about seventh grade, and then after that, of course, went through, you know, Catholic, we used to call it back then CCD, Catholic schooling, received all of the sacraments as a good young Catholic would. And then I started in property management. And as I mentioned, I was traveling a lot, which when I very first started in the industry, I thought was kind of neat because the cool thing about the Catholic Church is it doesn't matter where you go to service, what we call mass. Doesn't matter where you go, it's the same, right? So you could go to mass in Kansas, you could go to mass here in Georgia, New England, wherever. It's always the same. But the cool thing is we are also very fortunate in the beauty of our churches, our cathedrals, the stained glass, the statues, everything. There is so much beauty within the church itself, within the walls of the churches. And so I actually thought it was really neat when I first started traveling. I was on the road, I would go to church, I would go to mass, and it was really amazing to see the different churches and the beauty of the churches that while I was out visiting. Did that for a while, and then for absolutely no good reason at all, I just stopped. I didn't really have any reason other than it was maybe a little inconvenient. I was traveling a lot. I was very focused and dedicated to my career. And with between all the travel and all the expectations around, work at that time, this was at a time we didn't have a work life balance. There was no such terminology, right? You just worked. And so I think I probably, in hindsight, just stopped going. And like a lot of people, a lot of Catholics go through this in their 20s and 30s where they just fall away. They just fall away from the church. And unfortunately, what happens is you say, oh, I don't need to go to church, right? I can pray at home. I can have conversations with God. I can read my Bible. I can do these things. And I don't have to necessarily go to the church to do it. But then what happens is you stop praying every day. You stop reading your Bible every day. You get out of those habits. And the adversary is very, very smart and very tricky. And we never want to underestimate him. And the minute that you stop good habits or stop doing something, it's a snowball effect, right? It starts getting worse and worse and worse. And so I just kept saying to myself, well, nothing bad is happening to me, right? Nothing bad is happening. But what I didn't realize is it was, because as you start to fall away and as you stop praying and you stop reading the Bible and you stop doing those things, then it gets a lot easier for the adversary to come into your life, right? And so for many years, I'd say probably until I moved to Georgia, which it's hard to believe, it's been about 10 years now, I didn't go to church. I was called myself a Catholic, but I didn't really go to church. I really didn't pray much. I really didn't do much with my faith. I moved here to Georgia, and my now husband and I moved here. He's in the industry as well. And we moved here for our careers, to grow our careers and to, have a better life here together. We didn't really know a ton of people. So I started, getting jobs here, and my career took off and did really, really well. And then one day I just started getting really sick, and it really caught up with me to the point where I was having such bad health issues. It was hard for me to even work every day. And so I started going to a lot of doctors, and nobody could figure out what was wrong. And it was very frustrating, and I couldn't figure out what to do. And so it was at a time it was really hard because I ended up losing my job. I was renovating our house. So we bought a beautiful house here in Villa Rica, just outside Atlanta, Georgia. We were renovating our house, so we were focused on that. I was very sick, and everything just always seems to kind of happen at once, right? So I was in a really bad situation. I found myself in the ER in full-on respiratory arrest. And so they rushed me into the ER and put a trach into my throat so I could breathe. So I spent quite a bit of time in the ICU, again, still trying to figure out what's going on, what's causing this, is it stress related? And so now I was out of job, in the middle of home renovations, in the ICU, all of these things, right? So they finally sent me home with my trach, and they said, but here's the thing, we don't want you to really leave the house, because when you have a trach, it's an open tube that goes directly into your lungs. And if you go outside, you run the risk of potentially taking something into your lungs, which could be deadly really, really fast. So we don't want you to go outside. So go home, stay home. Well, as many of, I'm sure your listeners are like me, you're used to working 12 or 14 hours a day on property, walking properties, doing all these things. To go home and sit at home and not do anything, I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I'm not going to do that. Like, it doesn't even sound great. And I know a lot of people experience that over COVID, right? But the thing is, I joke around too, I didn't have the luxury of doing sourdough bread starters, because flour, the idea of baking and flour sounded terrifying with an open trach, right? It's a terrible idea. So it's not recommended. So I started thinking, like, what are the things I can do? So I had a lot of doctor's visits, so I was getting out and doing that. But I started to think about, well, I can go to church, because I can go to church and sit in church. And, I had a really hard time talking, so it wasn't like I could communicate well, but I can go sit in church. It's always open. It's always free. I didn't have a ton of money, right? Because I was out of work. So let me just go to church. So I started finding different churches that had different mass at different times of day in my community. And every day I would just go sit in church and go to mass and sit in front of the Blessed Sacrament, in front of Jesus, and pray and talk to the Lord. And it really started to come back to me. And what was really cool is I felt like I was back home. And getting emotional just talking about this with you. But there was a very big shift in it, because it felt like I was home and comfortable, and everything was going to be okay. So I think that was the experience that kind of shifted everything for me and changed, and was able to say, oh, okay, I need to do this, right? And so now I'm great. I'm in a much better health. I did find a church community that I absolutely love here in Dallas, Georgia, and just started going more consistently. After that, obviously, came to work here for 111, going to mass every week, connecting with that community. I will say I don't know everything about the Catholic Church. I'm not a theologian, right? And I think the cool thing is that, it's this concept of faith-seeking understanding, right? So I'm always looking to understand more about my faith. I'm always looking to understand more about my journey, or, different things within the faith. And there's always more to learn. It's just like anything else in life. There's always so much more to learn. So I would say it impacted my life incredibly. And now I'm an adult. which is very different because when I was a child and I was very connected to my faith, I saw it very differently. You see faith very differently through the eyes of a child than you do when you're an adult. And so it's almost like learning all over again. And it's really a very neat place to be, to come back to the church, and get to see it again. And the other cool thing is, while I was out, I came to work for 111 Advisors, where we do all sorts of technology things in commercial real estate. Multifamily is obviously our primary focus. About 85 to 90% of our business is in multifamily, and work in technology every day, which is a whole lot of fun. But 111 was actually started, the name 111 comes from Ephesians 111. So, and I didn't know that when I started here, but when I learned that the founders of the firm actually came up with the name based on a Bible passage, that really said something to me. And I started to say, what about faith at work? What does that look like? And and how does that actually happen, right? And what are those things? What does that mean? It's a very interesting journey. Hopefully, I know I've talked about it for a while, but I think actually you shared your journey as well. And I think your journey is very interesting with coming over to the States and your background with your faith too. So I don't know if you wanted to share that as well.
Certainly, I being born in Romania at the time a communist country, faith was not around for me. I'm gonna explain. My parents were both teachers, and one thing about communists, they don't allow competition. Actually, they're exterminating their competition. This is the proper word. They
Mhm,
don't. For people to better understand this, communism is a religion. It has all the signs that religion has. Obviously, it's a destructive religion. And then they're looking at people of faith, Christians mainly, not just Christians, but let's just say that that was my personal experience. They're looking at Christians as adversaries, people that
mhm,
challenge what the communists believe in. They challenge their Bible, the Communist Manifest. Therefore, they're looking to, when they're in power, they're looking to put them in prisons to exterminate them. And that's actually a real thing that happened
mhm,
in 50s, 60s, part of the 70s in Romania. So growing up, my parents obviously they work with children, so it was a forbidden thing by the Communist Party for them to express any type of faith at school or to be seen as going to church, like simply just going to participate in a service at church. We're Orthodox Christians, just so the record straight, and they just stopped going to church. And I think they had a similar experience with what you just described. They just
mhm,
they weren't into faith anymore. So I grew up that way. It wasn't a lot of conversation about faith where we would go to church like on Eastern Eve, and just kind of it was more of a tradition than just like faith based, right? For us,
mhm,
it wasn't a faith exercise as much. So that was my experience. After communism was defeated, partially, 1989, my parents, especially my mom, turned to faith. But I was already like an adult. I was away from home, away from the parents. I didn't pay too much attention to the faith. I will say quite the opposite, really. And then there were certain things that came into my life that I couldn't really explain just by using rationale, like a rational mind, I'll say. And I start seeking, what could be the reason for these things that happen to me, and especially there were some life changing events. There were a couple of situations when I could have been like easily, I could have been dead, and I just happened to live both situations. Um,
mhm,
and then that started to make me think that there's something else out there than just regular transactional ways of living life. And
mhm,
I slowly started to study on my own, not necessarily within the church, but I started like reading the Bible, listening to the Bible, trying to understand. And it's an ongoing journey for me. It's I can't say that I'm too advanced in it, but I'm making an effort to get myself exposed to better understand the word of the holy book. So that's kind of have been my journey.
I love it. I know that's such a good story, and I love that you just took it upon yourself to do the research, right? And goes back to that faith seeking understanding. Like you have faith. There's something out there, but let me see if I can't figure out what it is. Let me start exploring and understanding that. And it is a journey. We don't. None of us are ever going to really fully understand all of it, right? So it's this constantly changing journey that I think if you put the time in, that the rewards are definitely worth it.
I'm actually excited to have you share the story because most people believe that this should not be shared in a public setting or like on a
Mhm.
podcast. And I commend you for doing that. I just think that there's a lot of people that resonate with your message, and a lot
Mhm.
of people that don't feel in any way, I'll say, offended by you speaking about, as honestly they shouldn't. Like
Yeah.
it's very simple. If you don't want to be exposed to any type of ideas or beliefs,
Mhm.
then just step away from it. But it doesn't mean that people that have them should stay silent. So again, it's amazing that we're having this conversation kind of like revolving around your faith and your conversation about faith and how do you integrate that into your life. So I'm curious of how do you balance expressing your faith in a typical professional environment, especially given the potential challenges that we just mentioned I just mentioned in a workplace.
Yeah. So I think it even back to how we started the conversation is you were posting scripture passages on LinkedIn. And I was like, "Ooh, he's brave," right? I was like, "Adrian, tell me about this," because I see so many times people posting things and you just get almost excoriated by the comments, right? People are like, "This is not appropriate. It's not the place, blah, blah, blah." And I was like, I love that you're doing this because you're right. Hey, if you don't want to hear it, keep scrolling. You don't have to follow my feed. You don't have to read it. You can keep scrolling. You can block me. You have options if you don't want to hear it. But if you do, it may just come at the right time when somebody needs to hear it, right? And so that's where that power is. So when I first started at 111, as I mentioned, I started thinking about what does this mean. My background's operations, and look, I'm a tactical girl. I'm a checklist kind of girl. I want to be able to sit here and say I did this today or I did that today, and it's not that, right? Because I think that's I was trying to force it into that. Oh, do I say this to this person or do I do this at work, or you know it's not that. It's a little bit less checklisty and a little bit more art, right? If I could try to explain it in words. I think one of the guiding principles outside the 111, the Ephesians 111 passage that I try to carry with me every day is a passage from John. It's chapter 13, verse 34. And to give some context, we're coming right out of Easter, right? You and I speaking right after Easter. And this is at the Last Supper when Jesus is having his Last Supper. And after they finish eating, he washes the apostles' feet. And that whole scenario where he is washing the feet of his followers resonates with me so much. You don't get a better view of a leader than you do in that passage. That is truly a servant leadership. Now, it may present itself in different ways, but anybody who manages anybody that reads that passage can understand what I'm saying, that hey, like this is something that as a leader, as a manager, as somebody who works with residents, who works with owners, who works with people in general, knows that you have to serve people, right? That is what we are here to do. And so I think it's important to take that aspect in everything you do, that you are here to serve others, and that is what Jesus is really asking us and calling us to do. And that can take so many different forms because people need different things at different times. And so I think it's really paying attention to what other people are saying and listening to others. I actually, listen to my team quite a bit, and I encourage them to come to me and ask things and talk about things. And just to give kind of a tactical example, because again, I'm a very tactical person, so it helps me to say, oh, okay, that makes sense. I'll have sometimes once in a great while, somebody on my team will call me and say, hey, I'm having a rough time. Such and such is going on, or something's, a family member or a friend is having a medical issue, or I'm distracted by this, these personal things, kind of regardless of if you try to leave that at home or not, right? It's still going to impact what you do in your work day to day. If I know, and if I have heard them say that, hey, I'm struggling with this, I'm praying about it, I don't know what to do, it's really taking me away from my work, I say to them, I'm going to pray for you. I'm going to pray for your friend. I'm going to pray for your family member. And I'm going to pray for you that you get through this, that you have the grace, that you have the ability to get through this and get to the other side of it. And so if somebody opens that door and they say, I'm praying about this, or I'm struggling with this, and I hope God helps me with this, or whatever that means, they are literally opening the door just a little bit for me to kind of walk through. And I take that opportunity. I don't squander it. I make sure that when I hear something like that, I know. Now, on the flip side of that, you may say, well, what about somebody that doesn't say, hey, or you don't know, right? Because there's a lot of people out there, you don't know their stance and you don't want to make anybody uncomfortable. I still pray for them, but I may not just automatically go to that, right? I might say, tell me more. What can I do to help you? Is there anything I can do? Is there anything the team can do? Is there something that I need to take off your plate or help you with? Tell me more about that, because your family is your most important thing. And if there's something that I can do or the team can do to help you get through this, I want to know what that is. And it doesn't matter if it's work related or not. We're going to figure this out, and I'm going to help you. And then I might go and pray for him anyways, but I might not lead with that, but I will still do it. And it's interesting what has happened in that is pretty much everyone on my team will say that to each other. I've actually have this environment now where when we get on a team call, if somebody says, oh, my mom's having surgery, or something's happened with my cousin or something like that, they'll say, you know what, I'm going to pray for you. And we're like, oh, thank you so much, and so it's created this great environment where they're taking care of each other and they're modeling that behavior for each other. And you just can't get any better than that.
Tell me about how praying has influenced your life, like some practical stuff, like your experience. How did,
Yeah.
like, you also had the experience when you stepped away from the church and from
Mhm.
from the faith. So tell me the differences that you learned, like how did they affect your life?
I think the cool thing about prayer for me is that, first of all, again, going back to, I'm a very tactical person. So I want to say, okay, a prayer needs to be, I start at A and I end with Z, right? And it's not, right? So I think prayer for me can take many different forms. One of the things that's helped me with is really being quiet. And I think that's a tricky one. I think I had gotten to a place in my life where I always wanted to have noise. And I feel like, especially in what we do, there's a lot of noise. There's residents, there's staff, there's owners, there's all this noise all the time. There's always so many things going around. We're in this environment of this kind of, craziness constantly. And so for me to actually like sit down and say, I'm going to be quiet, I'm going to say a prayer, whatever that is, and exactly whatever that form could be, and I'm gonna do that, and then I'm just gonna be really, really quiet for a minute because I want to listen for anything that comes into my mind that could potentially take me to that next step. And so it could be just that. The biggest sort of overarching thing I would say is that being quiet, and that takes practice. That is not something, what do they call it? Like monkey brain, right? That it could, everything in your brain's going 100 miles an hour. I am one of those people, I either have the radio on or the TV on. I've always got some noise. But for me to just sit down and be quiet and spend time with the Lord just really has made an impact in my mental well-being, in my physical well-being, and just really, over time, right? It's not like, we use this example right at church, like, "Oh, I'm going to pray for a Lamborghini." Well, that's not really prayer, right? Like, it doesn't work like that. And so, but the consistent quiet and sitting in peace and spending time with the Lord, I think over time makes such a positive impact in all aspects of your life that I would say there's no replacement. There's nothing else that you can do. And that ability to be quiet. And I've also transitioned that into now when I have a really difficult situation at work and I feel like my head's going to explode, because that still kind of happens sometimes, I can quiet my mind better. You and I are probably used to this, Adrian, right? Like we have like 10, 12, 13 phone calls a day, or we go to a trade show and we have like 6 or 8 meetings. And by the end of the day, you're like reverberating, you're just like, I'm so wiped out. But to be able to step away for a few minutes and just be like, okay, I just need to be quiet. I have 5 minutes in between meetings. I'm going to just be quiet for a minute. Hey, if I can get in a couple words of prayer, that's great. But even just the ability to be quiet is such a skill that requires practice and constant attention that I think that has made such a positive impact on everything that I do.
I think in so many ways, faith is like a code, a moral code, uh, a set of principles that you kind of like rely on when you're making decisions in your life, in your career, at work. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, have you had any significant experiences where your faith has influenced your professional interactions or decisions?
Yeah. I mean, it certainly impacts every day, right? Like I think faith is a lifestyle, not a visit to a church once a week or whatever. But I would say one specific situation that I will share is I was out with a couple colleagues and somebody who is on my team. We were at dinner one night, and the other lady we were having dinner with, I've known her for a long time. She's been in the industry for a while. And her and I are both Catholic, and this other person is not and has faith, but just not Catholic. She's Christian. We were talking, this other colleague of mine, we were talking about Catholic stuff, sharing some things that were happening in our parish and stuff like that. And so this other person said, "Well, help me understand this." And then that led to more conversation about other things that she didn't know about. And now I have the ability to have a conversation with that person on a regular basis about my faith and about my journey and the things that I can share with this person that had no idea about these things in the Catholic Church. That to me is incredibly impactful because I love talking about my faith, obviously, right? We wouldn't be here if we weren't. And I absolutely love the church. I think there's so many great things about the church that go unnoticed, that people don't talk about. Everybody always talks about, the terrible things around the Catholic Church. And so you don't often hear about the great things about it. And so for me to be able to actually do that, and by the way, this is somebody in our industry, this is somebody that I respect, that, does a phenomenal job every day, that ask those questions and ask me things, and to get more of an understanding around the things that we do and the beauty of the faith and the scripture behind it and all of those things is just really incredible for me. And I was very excited about that because those opportunities, even in day to day, even if it's outside of work, they don't present themselves that frequently. But when they do, I get very excited about it because I think that being able to share that faith with somebody and being able to share those ideas with somebody is incredibly powerful.
Michelle, any Bible passages that have resonated with you lately?
Yeah, so this was a hard one. I'll tell you, Adrian. When we talked, and this was a question that you mentioned you might ask, and I was all excited. I was like, "Oh yeah, there's hundreds of them." Well, the good news is there's hundreds of them. The bad news is there's hundreds of them, right? So it's very hard to pick which one. I was like, I don't know. And I even this morning I was working out with some friends of mine, and I said, "What's your favorite Bible passage?" Because I've got to come up with something. And so I was trying to figure out like, what am I going to say? And the oddest thing happened. So I came home and I grabbed my Bible to get ready. And I was like, okay, I want to make sure I got my passages right. I need to come up with something to answer Adrian. So I'm going to look in my Bible and I'm going to see. And sure enough, in my Bible, don't you know, I had a sticky note in my Bible. And I have sticky notes on all my books. It's just the way I, process and save information and, hardcover books. People even do that anymore. And so I had a sticky note in a passage. And I said, well, that's interesting. Let me go ahead and see what that says. And so I opened it up and I read it and I said, oh my gosh, this is the one. I've got to share this one with him. So if you don't mind, if you'll indulge me for a minute, I'll read it to you. So this is the Gospel of Matthew. It is chapter 11. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in my heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. I mean, that's just phenomenal, right? Like anytime you have a problem, anytime you have a burden, anytime anything's not going easy, he's right there to help you out.
It's beautiful, and I couldn't think of a better way to wrap up this conversation about your faith, about your journey, and about things that matter really.
Yes. I appreciate it. The other thing I'll tell you is one of the other things we didn't talk about is, resources. If people are out there and they want to get more, I am a huge fan of the Hallow app. So you can find it on iTunes. You can find it on, I'm sure Android has it. So it's HALLOW. You may have seen commercials with Mark Wahlberg promoting it. So it's a great app. There's a ton of stuff in it. And if you're looking for something to listen to on a regular basis, I do every morning. That's where I go first thing in the morning, get my little fix, if you will. So that is it's a great resource. If any of your listeners are interested, I would highly encourage them to take a look at that.
Thank you for sharing the resource, and again, thank you for being here today to share your amazing journey, and hopefully
Adrian, yes,
hopefully it's with others too.
yes,
I'm sure it is.
it is. It'll resonate with the right people, right? That's the important part. And
Correct.
I appreciate you taking the time, and peace be with you and all your listeners.
Thank you, Michelle. And I hope to see you on a conference tour on a conference circuit soon.
Yeah,
Pretty
absolutely. I'll definitely see you down the road.